In this chapter, we're going to look at kind of musculoskeletal and functional health. So really looking at the muscles, kind of the bones around that as well, and what's kind of out there, what are some of the concerns health-wise, and then what kind of research looks at or indicates is effective with physical activity and muscles and bones. So again, you have your objectives here as we go through. Things that you can ask yourself is, can exercise improve the strength and quality of bone tissue? So can it literally help with your bones? And so you can look at those types of things. We've got key terms here. Definitely get familiar with things like osteoporosis and osteoarthritis, bone mineral density, muscular strength and endurance. Most of you guys know that. Functional health or functional ability, activities of daily living. So looking at a lot of those. And so where we start with is it just jumps into risk factors, but we're going to start talking about osteoporosis. And so osteoporosis is the weakening of bones over time, or the weakening of bones. Your bones typically in younger adults, even adolescents, are very strong. They're like rocks. But over time, we know that the bones will start to get a little bit weaker, become less like rocks and more like sticks, and more easily broken. Not, again, super easy, but more easily broken. And so when your bones get to a certain level of, we could say, weakness, or they're just not as strong as they used to be, this is a clinical condition called osteoporosis, where your bones are just weaker. They're a little bit more brittle, more easily broken. And so there are things that put you at risk for developing osteoporosis later on in life. You can develop it early on in life. It's not very common, but it can happen. But we know as you get older that this can affect it for sure, because the longer you go, the tends to be the weaker your bones may become. And so some of the risk factors that we've got, of course, modifiable risk factors for osteoporosis. This would be things like physical inactivity. Being physically inactive makes your bones weaker. Tobacco use makes your bones weaker. If you are thin or underweight, this can actually make your bones weaker because you're not subjecting them to as much force, even just standing there. Someone who tends to be overweight actually has a slightly reduced risk for osteoporosis because their excess weight is actually putting pressure on their bones, making them a little bit stronger. Alcohol abuse, alcohol, especially excess, gets rid of those strong bones quicker. It makes them weaker quicker. Low sex hormones, so if you have low levels of things like estrogen or testosterone, these can make a difference. If you don't get enough intake of vitamin D and calcium, or you're unable to absorb it, and then even excessive caffeine intake can increase your risk for osteoporosis. And all of these we can have control over from even the sex hormones. There are medications that can be given to help with this, or lifestyle changes that can be done. So these are things that we can modify, but there are also non-modifiable risk factors for osteoporosis. And so age is one of them. As you get older, your risks go up. Bones tend to get weaker over time. After you hit about the age of 28, your bones start getting weaker for the rest of your life. Up until that point, they usually are getting stronger, or at least staying put. And so the older you are after the age of 28, typically the weaker your bones are. Sex makes a difference. Females are more likely to develop osteoporosis than males, but males are more likely to develop cardiovascular disease. Your genetics makes a difference. Ethnicity and race makes a difference. So Asians tend to suffer from osteoporosis a little bit more. African Americans or Africans suffer from osteoporosis the least, but cardiovascular disease is kind of the opposite. So Africans suffer cardiovascular disease much higher rates than Asians. And then if you have a history of fractures, so you've had a history of broken bones, this can increase your risk for for osteoporosis as well. And so you look at all those things, and so you can kind of see how exercise can be helpful in some of those modifiable things. And so related to osteoporosis is osteoarthritis. So OA is how they abbreviate it. And it has risk factors that you're going to see look very similar, but also a little bit different than osteoporosis. And so osteoarthritis is usually where there is pain and irritation where two bones come together in the joints. It can be in other places as well, but think about arthritis. People have achy joints. This is osteoarthritis, so typically caused by bones, possibly rubbing together. It can happen through overuse, so excessive physical activity or overuse. So think almost like tennis elbow. Maybe someone has overused their elbow, and maybe this led to some osteoarthritis over time. Maybe they played for many, many years. Excess body mass can definitely lead to that because it puts more pressure on those joints. But we also know that being physically inactive can lead to osteoarthritis. So you're kind of seeing that, well, too much is a bad thing, but also too little. So there's a Goldilocks zone in that osteoarthritis category. When it comes to our risk factors, we also have non-modifiable risk factors for osteoarthritis, pretty much the same as heredity, sex, age. But there's also, if you've had a history of a joint injury, maybe, at some point in your life you injured a certain joint, it's more likely that joint may develop osteoarthritis. And so when we look at these particular things, we're always about looking at those risks and then trying to encourage exercise, but at the same time, how do we measure? How do we know where they're starting at? Is this program working? And so we're always looking at how can we measure things like musculoskeletal function, maybe your function of your muscles and your bones and those risks for things like that. And so when it comes to it, we can measure really many different things when it comes to your musculoskeletal system, and each one of those has to have a slightly different measurement. So for measuring muscular strength, we can do something like 1 repetition max or 5 repetition or 10 repetition max. So literally how much weight can you move 10 times the same way and not anymore. So if you can lift at 11, that's too much, or that's not enough, so we're going to put more weight on. How much can you maximally move 10 times? Hand grip dynamometry, so that's where we see how hard you can literally squeeze onto something. Like think about giving a handshake, how tightly can you squeeze the other person's hand is a good indication of someone's strength. Muscular endurance, so instead of seeing how much weight we can move one time, we're going to see how many times can we move the same weight over and over and over again. Maybe you did this in high school with a sit-up or a pull-up test or a push-up test. How many pull-ups can you do before you can't do anymore, or those types of things. We can look at power, so not only how strong, but how quickly you can do something. There's a thing called a Wingate power test, anaerobic power test, which is on an electronically controlled bike, you pedal for 30 seconds against your 7 to 8% of your body weight, and we see how much energy you can produce, like literally how many watts of energy you can produce. But a way that would be a little bit easier to look at this would be something like a vertical jump. How high can you jump or how long can you jump kind of indicates that power. And these are really looking at muscles, so strength, endurance, or power with your muscles. We can also look at other things that are related to your skeletal muscle system, so maybe your balance, so a one-legged stand or a gait speed, a balance test. So there actually are those. We have gait, which is related to this, so it's all about how is your body being able to control your muscles and your entire body. So a get up and go test is how quickly can you get up out of a chair, go a very short distance, come back to the chair and sit down. Kind of shows what your kind of looks at the gait and how that goes and how your body is able to maintain balance as well. Mobility, so kind of thinking about flexibility almost. There's a goniometer test that measures your range of motion in different joints. And then looking at your bones in particular, we have what's called a DEXA, an ultrasound, and this is where we can actually look at the bones and quantify how strong maybe your bones are. And that would be how they diagnose something like osteoporosis. And so all these go together to look at how your musculoskeletal system performs over time or at a given point, and can kind of assess your risk for things like osteoarthritis or osteoporosis or other things as well, maybe how strong you are. And so when we look at the scientific evidence, there is, so when you look at that, maybe I explained in other chapters, but we have strong evidence. That means we're really certain that these things occur. We have moderate, where we're pretty sure these things occur. We have some evidence where we're these things are likely to be true, but may or may not be. We have things that have little evidence. So there are a few things out there that are indicating this, but it wouldn't take much to go the other direction. And then there's basically no evidence saying we have no clue that it's there. And so there's moderate evidence that says that there's a inverse relationship to physical activity and exercise and hip fractures. Basically, the more exercise you do, the less likely you are to have a hip fracture. So there's a moderate amount of evidence for that. We also see that there's a relationship between physical activity and vertebral fracture. So literally having breaking your back type of thing, breaking the little bones in your back. We have some evidence of that. It's not as strong as the hip fracture evidence. And then we have no evidence that regular physical activity promotes the development of osteoarthritis. So if you participate in activity on a regular basis, there's no evidence indicating that you would develop osteoarthritis. So those joint issues. We know that excessive amounts, especially if you've had an injury in the past, could lead to that, but there's no evidence saying just regular moderate intensity activity is going to lead to osteoarthritis, which is what some people say when they don't want to do exercise. We have strong evidence that there's association between physical activity and the relief from pain from arthritis. So if you do have joints that ache, we know that being physically active can actually help reduce that pain. And so, again, finding that fine line between no activity and too much when it comes to the arthritis. At the end of the day, evidence suggests that when it comes to adults and arthritis, getting that 150 minutes, of moderate intensity activity spread throughout the week is really good at helping with that. And we know that both aerobic and muscular strength, so think about running versus lifting weights, both can help to reduce that pain and improve the function in the joint. So all modes of activity do well. Children are, again, encouraged to do physical activity. We've talked about this before. Again, trying to shoot for that 60 minutes or an hour every day. That is going to help strengthen their muscles and their bones at a young age to help prevent issues later on in life. And they should also specifically do some bone strengthening activities that have high impact to help strengthen those bones over time. And so we know that there are community-based or home-based physical activity programs, things you can do in your home with little to no equipment that can actually help to reduce the risk of injuries from falls. So as adults get older, they tend to become more likely to have a fall in their home. Their coordination is off and things, and doing a little bit of in-home activity, home-based physical activity can help reduce the risk of injury from a fall. And this would include things like bone fractures, head trauma, maybe bruising, things like a soft tissue that you have. And we know that older adults should include balance activities that are listed there to help them keep their balance at a higher level so that they're less likely to fall as well as they go throughout time. So again, that scientific evidence is just kind of giving you an overview of that. There's moderate scientific evidence that physical activity and exercise at midlife. So kind of think about the halfway point of life helps to reduce your severe functional limitations. So we're saying we think there might be a relationship that the more you exercise, the less likely you are to have problems with daily activities or functional movements as you get older. So that's always a good thing. We also know that it may help to improve functional ability. Unfortunately, there is no evidence to show that physical activity and exercise can help prevent disability in older adults who already have functional limitations. And so those are there, and we do know that we can help reduce the risk of falls in older adults by up to 30%, again, with regular physical activity. So that kind of covers this chapter. It's a little bit shorter, a little bit sweeter. Again, read your book, kind of go through that. Email me if you have any questions, and look at the review material that your book has provided.